thanks very much for coming to this conference, and I feel very honored to speak here in this incredible room. And I'm really honored also to tell a little bit about the development to have ecocide as a crime against peace, and to basically to have ecocide law as a way to protect our common home, the earth. So my name is Femke Wijdekop, I'm from the Netherlands, and I got exposed to this ecocide law some 4 years ago, and ever since my life has not been the same. I hope it will be the same for you. So law sometimes is called the DNA of our society. It is a thread that winds through our lives and through our communities, and it structures our relationships. It sets the rules for how we live together, for whom we can marry, when that marriage is over, that we have to stop at the red light, and that there are consequences if we don't honor our agreements. Law designs our relationships, and it also designs our relationship with nature. Now, if we look at the more than 1,000 treaties, agreements, declarations, and conventions that are about protecting the environment, or we realize that there are more than 90 nation states that protect the right to a clean and healthy environment in their constitution, one could easily conclude that our relationship with nature must be a healthy one. It seems so, if we look at the text. However, if you look at the daily news, we are confronted with a very different reality. Every day we hear about climate change, about the extinction of species, about large-scale destruction of ecosystems, like recently the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef made headlines. And we read about environmental disasters. Most of these events are actually attributable to us human beings. So if we are exposed to the real world, our relationship with nature is not a healthy one, it's pretty dysfunctional. Perhaps we can even say it's toxic. So law is failing to protect the earth, our common home. For example, the right to a clean and healthy environment is in the constitution of more than 90 nation states. However, it is what we call soft law. It doesn't have real teeth. It's not directly enforceable in court. That's a huge problem. Also, for example, the pledges made by the parties to the Paris Agreement to reduce CO2 emissions are not legally binding. And there is no international mechanism to ensure the compliance with these national pledges. Overall, environmental law has not been able to stop the overexploitation of natural resources, nor has it been able to prevent or mitigate climate change, the mass extinction of species, and environmental disasters. Why is this so? As the former speaker, I think that the root cause of this failure of law to protect our common home is that our legal and economic system commodifies nature. So our legal system sees nature as property, as we heard in Mary's speech. And this attitude towards nature is largely an heritage from the Age of Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment was very important in the development of law. It gave us many positive things, like the separation of state powers and the fundamental rights and freedoms of man. Central to the Enlightenment was the idea of liberation, to liberate man from repressive traditions, repressive religions, from power abuse by almighty kings. The idea of individual autonomy took root, And thanks to fundamental rights and freedoms, such as the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of property, individuals were freer than they were before to think, believe, and act as they wanted, as long as they did not violate other people's right to do the same. Of course, I should note that if I talk about men, indeed I talk about white men of a certain social standing, because they were understood to be men in the area of enlightenment. And later became all white men, and then white men and women, then white men and women and colored men, and then colored women at the end. So this is still relative, but I think we see an increase, a widening of the circle of who we consider to be subjects under law, who we consider to have intrinsic value and human rights. So the Enlightenment was important in this sense. But there is also a very dark side to this heritage we have. The Enlightenment also developed a philosophy of materialism, which says that physical matter is ultimately the only reality. And that everything, also our feelings and thoughts, can be explained in terms of physical phenomena, natural phenomena. Thanks to the scientific discoveries of that age, and to the technological innovation, man started to be able to measure and understand and ultimately control these physical phenomena, or so he thought. By using reason and scientific methodology, man could finally dominate nature and organize nature in neatly divided categories. Because another characteristic of the Enlightenment era was thinking in terms of separation. Enlightenment separated facts from values, reason from faith, and humans from nature. Human freedom and autonomy was defined separately, in isolation from the well-being of the wider Earth community. That's why I think that right now what we need is an update. We need an Enlightenment 2.0, because we are wiser now. Nature lost its sacred dimension. It became an object that we could control and exploit. The invention of the steam engine played a big part in this, because it enabled the big projects of industrialization and colonialism, because these ships were now able to cross the seas independent of the strength of the wind and the power of the wind, the direction of the wind. So it opened up their access to other countries, to foreign countries, and to the raw materials they contained. The idea took root that not only foreign peoples, but also nature itself could be conquered. And legislative assemblies helped with that. They passed laws that enabled economic expansion, and they chartered, authorized companies to go and conquer the earth. And I think this quote by 18th century clergyman and philosopher William Durham summarizes the spirit of his time. We can ransack the whole globe, penetrate into the bowels of the earth, descend to the bottom of the deep, travel to the farthest regions of this world to acquire wealth. So I think this is quite a violent quote. It shows the dark habit of the Enlightenment habit of thought, that the world is understandable on rational grounds and that it is controllable, and that we humans have the right to change the world, to improve our own condition. And back then we thought that to improve our condition is to acquire wealth. These norms, these Enlightenment norms and way of thinking, it became a very deep structuring principle in a modern culture. Our economic and legal systems and policies are firmly based on these principles still. The freedom of commerce and the right to property became the central features of our legal and economic systems. Many legislation, many codes of commerce put the obligation for companies to make the short-term interest of the shareholder their first priority. And this means that they place the interest of the shareholders, the monetary drive, short-term drive, the bottom line. And this means that that will be at the expense of people and planet. So, even though we've seen a rise of environmental law, particularly since the 60s and 70s, environmental law has not been able to change this around. And Marie addressed that very eloquently. Because environmental law still operates within the same operating system. It doesn't address the core flaw. It protects some in a fragmented way, but it doesn't address the idea that nature is property. So the basic contradiction remains that our legal system authorizes us to consume the very biosphere that we are part of and that we depend on. So if we treat nature as a commodity, this leads to violations of nature's rights. That is a logical conclusion. It also leads to violation of human rights. Because if we violate nature, humans also suffer as a consequence. The unbridled extraction of natural resources and of fossil fuels leads to environmental destruction and to climate change. Environmental destruction and climate change, it results in a violation of human rights. Human rights to life, human right to health, human right to food, human right to a safe environment, to family life, and so on. If we look back to 2015, more than 1,200 Pakistani died because of heat waves, because of climate change. 50,000 Filipinos, they had to leave their land and their places where they were living, where they had their roots, because of the Manila floods. The oil spills in the Niger Delta and the Ogoni Delta have robbed so many of their incomes and livelihoods, and it has robbed many of their health and even of their life. And also another example is that in the Virunga Park in the DRC, more than 150 rangers have been killed the last few years by armed groups and by rebels who want to exploit nature and who want to poach uninterrupted. And this brings me to a topic that is very dear to my heart, that is the violence against environmental defenders. People who stand up to protect the earth are under attack. Every week, 3 of them are killed. Many more, to be honest, but 3 a week is the data we have. This is coming from a report from Global Witness from 2016 on dangerous ground. And most of the killings take place in Latin America, especially in Brazil. And most of them, the defenders, they come from indigenous communities. So this picture I paint of co-violations of human rights and nature's rights is pretty bleak. It's pretty depressing. It raises some upsetting questions. Are we humans, given our extractive mindset or inclination and our highly developed technology, are we destined to become parasites on this earth, to feed off our host, the earth, until natural resources become depleted to such an extent that our own lives become impossible? Isn't this obviously self-destructive? If we violate the planetary boundaries that life on Earth is subjected to, and how many other species do we take down in our fall? Who told us we have that right to do that? Or is it not too late to change our course and to harmonize our human laws with nature's laws? Not too late to recognize that actually nature and the planetary boundaries are the ultimate court of appeal, the ultimate judge. So I'm glad also I can give some more positive news at this point of my presentation, because I see some developments that I describe as a movement from the right to exploit to duty of care towards nature. This development is an expression of the growing insight we have that we humans are actually interconnected to nature. We are part of nature. And that's why if we act destructively, ultimately we act destructively towards ourselves. I think that this awareness of interconnectedness to nature is something that many of us feel in our hearts. Many of us feel with our senses. And it's also encouraging. This is something that science is starting to tell us too. So it's also coming from, let's say, the more rational perspective. It also gives us feedback that nature is alive, it's complex, it's dynamic, it's creative, it's not dead matter. So in different branches of the law, we see an expression of this growing awareness of interconnection to nature and to future generations. Yeah, also for the lawyers among us.
Excuse me, may I just say something about that? You also have
I think maybe the questions could be after the presentation.
It's a case in Sweden. I see that you haven't noticed, but...
I will.
Okay.
It's okay, thanks. So in tort law, which is law, this is litigation between private parties, like citizens and corporations, we see a developing duty of care for corporations with regards to human rights and environmental human rights. Corporations are under a duty to prevent their actions or the action of their suppliers or the subsidiaries from violations of human rights. And if corporations do not take action to prevent such violations, or if their actions or omission cause damage to third parties, they violate their duty of care to respect human rights and also environmental human rights, and they can be liable in court. This is quite a recent development that we see more of this kind of litigation. Examples are the Dutch Shell case, the Trafigura cases, and the British Cape and Chandler cases. It's a developing duty of care of corporations. Also, climate litigation is on the rise. The Argenda case brought us the first victory 3 years ago already, when the Hague District Court ruled that the Dutch government, the Dutch state, had a duty of care to reduce its CO2 emissions by 25% in 2020. I myself was one of the co-litigants, and it was an amazing day. We didn't see it coming. It was quite a surprise, but we were very encouraged and also quite touched by this ruling. And it has encouraged many other organizations around the world who have started similar climate cases. Recently in Pakistan, the Lahore High Court ruled that the government, with its delay in implementing its climate policy, was violating fundamental constitutional rights to life and dignity. In the United States, there was also a victory when the Judge Hollis Hill ruled that the state has a constitutional obligation to preserve, protect, and enhance the air quality for current and future generations. And Belgium and French and Swedish, Norwegian, and also Indian climate cases are prepared as we speak. They are in different stages of implementation. So thirdly, we see a trend of institutionalizing a duty of care towards nature and towards future generation by the establishment of ombudsmen for future generations, or parliaments for parliamentary commissions for future generations. For example, in countries such as Hungary, Wales, okay, that's a province, but Finland, Germany, Canada. Also in my own country, we now have a shadow ombudsman for future generations, and we hope to have an official one soon. Fourthly, we have the growing movement to give rights to nature, which Mari addressed. So I will talk the remainder of my lecture about the international movement to define the duty of care towards nature as a matter of criminal justice, ecocide law. So the term ecocide was first used by the American biologist Arthur Galston. And this biologist in the 1950s had worked as a team of scientists who helped prepare a chemical proponent for the defoliant Agent Orange. And when Galston realized how Agent Orange was used in the Vietnam War, causing massive damage to human health and destroying vegetation on an enormous scale, he was so appalled that he became an anti-war activist. He didn't realize that his knowledge would lead to such an unwise use of the product. such a destructive use. And at the 1970 Conference on War and National Responsibility, he called the damage and destruction of the Vietnamese jungle an ecocide. And that word comes from the Greek word for home, oikos, and the Latin word for demolishing or killing. So it means killing of our home, just like genocide is killing of people, then ecocide is the killing of our home, the earth. So the study by Galston to stop ecocide in Vietnam, it got picked up by the anti-war movement in the US, in Europe, also in Asia. And in 1972, the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, during his opening speech at the UN Stockholm Conference on the Environment, the first international conference on the environment, he called the Vietnam War an outrage sometimes described as ecocide. During the 1970s and 80s, the idea of expanding the Genocide Convention to include other crimes against humanity also meant that several countries supported the inclusion of ecocide as an international crime. And actually, in the first draft of the Statute of Rome, which is the treaty for the International Criminal Court, had an article which prohibited ecocide. It was Article 26, and it read, "An individual who willfully causes or orders the causing of widespread, long-term and severe damage to natural environment shall be sentenced." So this was an article to actually make ecocide a crime. But this article was withdrawn from the draft code in a very strange way. It was done not democratically, it was done unilaterally, probably under the pressure of states. Now the Rome Statute, the Treaty of the International Criminal Court, only prohibits ecocide in times of war. It has never been invoked because the thresholds are very high. So basically what we see is the last few years there has been a resurgence of this idea of ecocide, that it should be a crime. We can look at the work of Polly Higgins. She proposed to the United Nations International Law Commission to make ecocide a crime. And she defines ecocide as extensive damage, destruction, or loss of ecosystems that basically diminishes the peaceful enjoyment of the inhabitants of that territory. And inhabitants is both humans as non-humans, so this has an ecocentric focus. It's not anthropocentric. Also, she wants to have personal liability for the CEOs and heads of state who are responsible for the ecocides, or who actually have not acted to prevent the ecocides. But actually, the goal of her proposal is not to incarcerate many heads of states or CEOs. The objective is really prevention of ecocides. And basically it is meant to become a catalyst in our transition to a sustainable society, because we place a firm bottom line on how we are allowed to relate to nature. And if we violate that bottom line, if we trespass it, that is a crime. So examples of ecocides are the Niger Delta oil spill, the deforestation of the Amazon, Deep Horizon oil spill, fracking, the Athabasca tar sands, and the Fukushima nuclear disaster. So the work of Polly Higgins inspired a group of people who started the petition towards the environment, towards the European Commission to make ecocide a crime in Europe. And actually this movement morphed into End Ecocide on Earth. And End Ecocide on Earth has made its own amendment. And this amendment has been handed over to Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary of the United Nations. End Ecocide on Earth defines ecocide as an extensive damage or destruction of the Earth's ecological systems in such a way that the planetary boundaries of resilience are exceeded, so that it leads to significant and durable alteration of the global commons. And what are the global commons? Oceans and seas beyond territorial waters, the Arctic, Antarctic, migratory species, genetic heritage, among others. And Ecocide on Earth also says that destruction of ecological systems is an ecocide because it is equal to a crime against humanity and future generations because it threatens their vital living conditions. So this amendment was used by the International Tribunal for the Rights of Nature at its session of the COP21 on the Chevron oil spill case in Ecuador. And this tribunal, will hear more about it from Cormac, who is the president, tomorrow. It was established during the COP and it judges cases on the basis of the Universal Declaration on Rights of Mother Earth. So what does it take to make ecocide a crime? Basically, if we are to make ecocide a crime, the Rome Statute should be amended. The treaty that is the basis of the International Criminal Court should be amended. And that takes a 2/3 majority, or 82 heads of state that agree to amend the treaty. So now it's a case of lobbying heads of states. And this is the focus of both Politica's work and Ecocide on Earth. And for example, the small island developing state who are endangered by rising sea levels and natural catastrophes that often are the result of climate change and human intervention, they could be a good candidate to support the amendment. Because they make up a very big voting bloc too, because they're more than 40. So if we have them at our side, we could already set something in motion. Okay, I'm going to finish in 2 minutes. Sorry. We still need to do a lot of work to get this 2/3 majority. And I think it will likely take an enormous amount of pressure from civil society to convince our heads of states to make ecocide a crime, because I think we're up against a very powerful lobby of the extractive and fossil fuel industries. But there are some developments that are quite hope-giving that suggest that civil society and institutional support for ecocide law will continue to grow in the coming years. Firstly, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has given priority to prosecute the existing crimes of aggression and crimes against humanity and war crimes if they take place in the context of environmental destruction. Secondly, this month the European Greens adopted a resolution on ecocide. They want environmental crimes to be a crime internationally, and they call for the establishment of an international environmental tribunal. Very cool that this Wednesday, 2 days ago, the Monsanto Tribunal ruled that if ecocide were to be added to the Rome Statute, Monsanto's commercialization of GMOs and their use of the pesticide glyphosate would constitute an ecocide. And that is very important for legitimacy. And also the tribunal said that they think the time has come for ecocide to become a crime and for it to be added to the ICC. So now what we need is a courageous head of state to take the amendment to the ICC Heads of States Conference. This is what I will end with. Because I think for a courageous head of state, what do we need? We need to encourage the head of states by being courageous ourselves. We need to demonstrate how to be a smart and passionate advocate for ecocide law. I think that we can do better than to ransack the whole globe to acquire wealth. And I always like this poem by Denise Levertov, that we have only begun to love the earth, we've only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How can we tire of hope when so much is in blood? I think we're about to discover our potential as humans and who we are in relationship to nature. And I really want to thank Pella, Peter, Niklas, Henrik, Emilia and the others of the team for organizing this conference, because I know it will nurture us to open more fully our butts and together take a next step towards healing our relationship with the planet. Yeah, so it's a bit emotional for me because it's such an intrinsic passion of mine. I want to ask you if this resonates with you to join our movements, to join Ecocide on Earth and Ecocide Sweden. And I want Eva and Robert please to stand up because they represent Ecocide on Earth. Robert? and Ecocide on Eva, and also the others that are part of the Ecocide Sweden team. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, please approach them and they will tell you more. So I hope that you will join our cause, and please approach me if you want to know more. And I really can tell you that if you join with this idea, whose time has come, your life will become quite adventurous and miraculous, as I have experienced in my life. Thank you very much.